Joining us now is the iconic and revered radio talk show host, who also happens to be Virginia's 1st District Republican Congressman, Rob Wittman. And now, Congressman, now that you're a radio star, you will likely never get an invitation to ride on Air Force One with President Obama like Scott Ridgel did, which means that nobody is going to take out negative ads against you in the 1st District. So life is pretty good.
Well, John, I tell you, it's great to be with you this morning. I don't know about all that, but I tell you, I really enjoyed coming in there and hosting the program. I certainly didn't get anywhere close to filling your shoes, but it was a great experience, and I fumbled my way through it. So,
well, we appreciate your fine effort, and I have heard feedback from across the state how stellar you were. In fact, one person wanted to send me a check to stay on vacation just so you could keep filling in for me.
No.
Of course, that was David Ramadan, I think. No, I'm just kidding.
All checks accepted and taken.
Exactly.
Congressman, I want to get right to, speaking of President Obama, he unveiled finally his plan on Wednesday. What was your take at first blush?
Well, I had a couple of concerns. First of all, that it increased taxes by $1.1 trillion. We've already been down that path, and we know that increasing taxes, especially during these economic times, is not the way to get this economy kick-started, nor is it a way to manage our deficits. It also increases spending significantly over that 10-year period. So it's another instance where this takes us in the wrong direction. It grows the budget, and it grows the amount of revenue that comes in. Instead of looking at it and saying, hey, listen, how do we manage spending? How do we make sure that we reform taxes in a way that helps to grow our economy? You know, tax reform shouldn't be about making people give more to the government. It should be about making government work more efficiently and strengthening our economy. And I tell you, this budget doesn't do that. One element, though, I will say this, one element that at least does get us to the discussion about spending in his budget is the proposal on the mandatory spending program, specifically on Social Security. So that discussion needs to be had. So it was good that at least that's been introduced so that can be part of the budget discussions. But the other elements there, for me, are very troubling. And last, and most importantly, is that this budget never balances. It never gets us to a point where we can say, hey, we can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel, where we are not continuing to grow the national debt. This budget doesn't do that.
You know, Congressman, that is what is so illogical about both the president's plan and the plan that came out of Harry Reid's office, or Patty Murray's office. Neither of these plans balance the budget, so there's no end to the debt rising in sight. And so for the average person on the street, there's no logic to that.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Everybody else has to balance their budgets, and everybody else that has debt looks to retire their debt instead of continuing to grow their debt. So I agree with you. It's absolutely illogical. It is not the path that this nation needs to be on. And I believe folks out there look at it and go, hey, we have got to turn this around. We have got to see that there is a strategy to get us to a balanced budget, a strategy to get the deficits to zero, and then a strategy from there to begin to pay down this debt.
I mean, anybody that's ever been either an executive with any P&L responsibility at all, or an entrepreneur, business owner like me, whatever it may be, if you're losing money and you've got investors or your own money is involved or whatever, you've got to provide a plan. And in that plan, it has to say, this is my strategy. And at some point in time, the bleeding will stop. And at some point in time, I'm going to turn a profit, or obviously my company isn't going to survive, or my division isn't going to survive. And so what neither of these two Democrat budgets do is provide a blueprint for eventual success somewhere, which to me is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is. And one of the elements, too, John, that's missing there is what pathway do these budgets create to make sure that we have economic growth in this country? And that is by smart tax reform, and that is not actually by increasing taxes, but looking at how do the current system of taxes affect business decision-making, individual decision-making, and where money is placed so that we can grow this economy. I want to make sure we have tax reform that encourages individual investment, encourages individual savings, encourages businesses to grow and invest and to hire people. That's not here in these budgets, and that's an important element of this. We have to take a budget that reduces spending, that makes sure that we have a tax system that's smart, and actually reduces the burden on folks, and then also have a budget that encourages economic growth. We don't get out of this current situation without having economic growth. I don't care how you look at it. If you don't have economic growth, then we don't get out of it. And the president's budget is also extraordinarily optimistic about growth projections, which, if those growth projections don't come to fruition, then we have even greater deficits because revenues don't come in as we expect, and therefore you have a bigger difference in the budget.
It's just does not make any sense at all. I want to shift, if I may, to a minute to Chuck Hagel. I know you were not a fan of Chuck Hagel at the time that he was nominated for Secretary of Defense. Now he's kind of in the middle of this Korean episode, some other items he's trying to do with the Department of Defense. How would you rate Hagel's performance up to now?
Well, I think he's doing what he needs to do. I'm concerned about the overall evaluation that he's proposing to do with the Pentagon. I want to make sure it doesn't become an effort to try to deconstruct our military. I think it's good to look at our strategy, determine what we're doing and how we're doing it, but it shouldn't be an effort to say, well, let's pare down the military to a point where it's ineffective. So we'll be watching very closely that effort. Actually, Secretary Hagel comes before the House Armed Services Committee today, so at 10 o'clock, he will be before us, and I will be asking him some questions specifically about, again, those long-term efforts and what he proposes to do and looking at the size and scope of our military. And I want to make sure our military is efficient in doing the things that it needs to do, but I also want to make sure, too, that we keep in mind its main function, and that is to protect this nation and to make sure that we project power around the world as a deterrent for conflict. And, we see today, too, with what's happening in North Korea and his statement recently to say that we will respond strongly if North Korea does act, I think is the right way to go. North Korea, being unpredictable as it is one of those areas that I think should emphasize in people's minds how important it is for the United States to have that capability, because who else in the world has that capability to deal with ballistic missiles and being able to shoot them down if perchance North Korea takes the wrong step and launches them.
Congressman, let's get to immigration reform. That's going to be making its way to the House pretty soon. I know it's a big issue not only for immigrants right now that are in the United States illegally for whatever reason, but also it's become an issue for the Republican Party as a whole, ties into their rebranding effort. What do you think is eventually going to play out?
Well, I think there will be an immigration reform bill that makes its way through the Senate. I know that it'll come over to the House. I hope it comes to us under an open rule so that we can have the ability to place our thoughts and ideas into the bill to make sure that it's a bill that reflects the House's perspective on things. So I do think it'll get out of the Senate. I do think that the House is focused on getting immigration reform through, making sure that it addresses border security and make sure we have a firm definition of what border security is and what it would ultimately be measured as, to make sure, too, that we have the ability for folks that are here to legally pursue assimilating as U.S. citizens, and I use the word assimilation because I think that's critical. That's what's made the U.S. special, is that people that have come here through the ages have always come here to assimilate as American citizens. So I think it needs to be an effort where we can make sure that folks assimilate here into America, and then make sure, too, that we have workable programs for folks that want to come here as guest workers. Not everybody that comes to the United States wants to be a citizen, and our guest worker programs right now have such low quotas that it forces folks that want to come here to work into either staying here on an expired visa or coming here even without a work visa. So I want to make sure that we fix those programs to make sure that there are legal pathways for folks to come here who want to come here. There are legal pathways with reasonable quotas for folks that want to pursue citizenship, to make sure that there's no excuse for anybody to be here illegally. And I think if you do that, then we can probably come up with something that meets the test, that stands by our system of laws here and stands by what has made America great, and that is we have been that melting pot, and that melting pot is where people come here and assimilate as Americans.
Well, let's move to guns and background checks on the sale between firearms legally right now between private citizens. How do you stand on that?
Well, we'll see what comes out of the Senate. My measure is this. We need to address gun violence. What is the causation of gun violence? What is behind those mental health or behavioral health issues with those individuals that we've seen in recent history that perpetrate these horrendous acts of violence with guns? But we also see that it's not the weapon itself that's at issue, because we saw just the other day a knife attack. So I want to make sure we understand, how do we interdict this type of behavior? How do we make sure we are responsible in addressing gun violence? And I want to make sure, too, that we look at that, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. And we ought to ask a question. Anything that comes before either body is, would this have done anything to prevent those episodes there, whether it's in Colorado or Virginia Tech or in Newtown? That ought to be the measure. And I can tell you, my wife's a school teacher, and she tells me every day of the concerns that she has. And we do have an obligation to make sure that we address the issue of gun violence, but we have to be thoughtful, too, and not get sidetracked with other issues that are tangential to the main cause of this gun violence, and that is, what precipitates that type of behavior. And that's, I think, what needs to be at the center of any debate. And of course, we'll see what comes out of the Senate. But whatever is taken up in the House, I believe that needs to be the center of what we consider.
Does the good Mrs. Wittman carry a firearm to class?
She does not. She does not. She does not carry, but she believes, too, that there can be protective measures taken in schools to make sure that we protect students there. So in case somebody comes there wishing to perpetrate harm, that we do everything we can to protect students. That's another element of it, in addition to addressing the behavior of those individuals that perpetrate gun violence.
Congressman Rob Wittman, he's from the 1st District of Virginia. He's a Republican and a key figure on the Armed Services Committee, and we look forward to getting your press release this afternoon after your questions to Secretary Hagel. Congressman Wittman, thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for guest hosting our show last Wednesday. You were fabulous. Thank you so much.
Well, John, thank you so much. It was great to be in the studio there with Steve. He kept me from falling out of the chair and doing anything anything that I wasn't supposed to do. So
fantastic.
You were brilliant, sir. It was good to see you face to face again.
Well, thanks again. It was an honor to be there as a guest host, and look forward to joining you all again.